hello everyone once again, and thank you so much for listening. I'm Zoe Rusia Moreno, and this is Architacora, a podcast dedicated to the narrative and visual design and all its in-betweens. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Once again, this show will be available in all podcast providers, so please give it a chance and subscribe. The illustrations known as Manga and Comic, together with the animation from both Oriental and Western sides of the globe, are moving towards this new era of expression in the entertainment industry, largely due to the people that basically grew up with them. And it is because of its capacity for growth and adaptation between all the times that this medium has become an international titan that captures the attention of the pop culture. Its design is dedicated to the entertaining of the masses, and through the use of international, interesting stories, fantastical stories, that it continued to inspire the imagination of whoever sees them. In this episode, we will talk about why it is so important, where hopefully we'll see how these links have affected our inner voice in the last few generations, and how these inspirations have defined that sense of self that we have today as designers. Enjoy! So today I wanted to talk about a quite entertaining topic that nowadays is considered a source of entertainment for many people. It is a popular medium that has grown with the last few generations and has adapted according to the needs of the public. The point of today's topic is how we reflect visual stories and narrative within the comic and manga world, along with the Oriental Western animation, or the Oriental, best known as anime, and the Western, best known as cartoons, to a design expression that has focused on producing these new creative trends. Its importance lies in the number of people who grew up with these stories, and now those same viewers have become the new creators of the media. And that's an interesting proposal, right? Because we subconsciously or unintentionally became fans of these tales, and in some way or another, these are a source of inspiration to what is happening now in culture. Even when a person does not follow these media, at least they're aware of its existence, not like many others. The culture of being nerdy within comics and cartoons is kind of in today, as people would say. And because of this, we as designers are going through an exciting moment where we let our experience as children simulate the expression of that special something or that no sé quoi, with the purpose to make an impact. Exactly what we did when we were children. Exactly what we experienced every Saturday morning when we were watching the TV in the living room. Because imagination is something that we have developed from a very early age. And thanks to the exposition of ideas and fantasies, we can already say that it's human instinct. Sure, different people develop it in their own way, but that's why it's a cultural conversation. For example, from my own point of view as an architect, the creation of worlds is what intrigues me the most about these fables. I find it interesting because as a designer, I see it in a way that you create the experience for the user. For other people, it might be the theme, the characters, the time and space, etc. Endless possibilities of finding something to relate with. Because what is nice about this visual narrative style is that it exposes you to a fantastic and unattainable subject, at least at a first glance. But at the same time, as I said before, in some way or another, it leaves lessons that resonates with the individual. Whether it is by using today's themes like the superpower, epic battles, the ideology of good and evil, or just simple discussions. Anime or manga, or cartoons and comics still have in common that part of entertainment and emotional bonding. And I have had the opportunity to speak with both fans and indifferent people, where I see that each conversation is very enjoyable. Because in some way or another, as I said before, everyone has a way to contribute to the conversation. Everyone is a fan of a good story. So that's why I will tell you to even experiment with this and see and talk about comics with other people, and you'll start to realize how fun that little experience will be. But coming back to Earth, one thing before going more broad on the subject, I think we need to a little refreshment of how the medium came to be and why it is. Because a funny thing is that both comics and manga started almost at the same time. The animation came later because the technology advanced, but both came out to create an escape of reality in their lines on the top of page per page, and it became part of the culture of their society. And despite the fact that people and the general public always have this notion that they're so different, in reality is that this media always had an entertainment goal, even since its conception. Because of the way that it influenced the general culture today, the reason why it became so famous is because it's trending now with the social big medias of the world like Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and also the development of other online services that has given the fans more access to the content simply at their fingertips. It should be added that everyone, including several generations like baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials, even the ones included today, grew up with this. So it's rare to think that this exposure to the environment has not affected our personalities, because each week these illustrations were read or seen by many. And although not so many are now reading, they are still exposed to the images through the use of social networking that created publicity for the masses. But why these companies are so dedicated to showing us these images? And why people are reacting if it is something so nonsensical? Is because every good story has an internal layering, and the development of a system is structured to create a product that reaches the viewers. And that's the reason why these big corporations keep investing in it, because they want people to see their product and keep investing. It continues the idea, or carries it. As they say, it's a follow-up of the imagination. By using big graphics and panels where there are basically no limits, the designer generates its goal. It creates that nirvana of what they want to continue innovating. So basically these corporations wants to continue that thought and that process of idea happening. So it's necessary to create this link between the viewers and creators, because through this bond is that we react and we continue to come back because we want more. Even the world that we create develops and we continue to observe. So our own perspective wants to continue that exploration, because the unknown is exciting. And that's why entertainment is so fun to us and is still exploited by any other type of corporations. But that's something that's the part of a conversation that can come on later as a negative. But the thing is just having fun of what we're seeing and make the best of it. I also want to explain the reason for the importance of this visualization style. The structure of the comic and the manga is very similar in a way, because they also communicate with the animation despite being a different media, because they complement one another. In the illustrations though, in the manga and comics, the Basic difference is because of their style of publication and continuation of timelines. I can take a little time to talk about that more, but I would like to refer to the similarities first because they're clearer. The layers of the stories are quite interesting, so let me tell you why. At first, you need to understand the creative text and apply it to the narrative. Once that's done, the illustrator has to create the world, so he makes the sketch. Then comes the artist that applies the ink. And then comes the colorist. And finally comes the last revisions that reach the publication. It is a machine. And although we celebrate the artist, the work is not his alone. It is a community. And even in our subconscious, we know that. That's why it's so intriguing. It is a subject where the story never belongs to just one person. There are internal conversations and developments between the different layers of artists, where in the end, they have to discuss their ideas to reach an endpoint. As they say, it's a total teamwork. It is only when we begin to speak between the cultures of both expressions that we begin to realize that the way of communication of ideas is reflected with the needs of the audience. One cannot speak of a medium without mentioning the history, the why. So, another part of a conversation is going back in time and understanding this part. In Japan and Asian cultures, they focus on creating a human relationship and bonds due to their long tails and generational focus. The origin of the manga as a way of telling stories and defining the word began during the second half of the 19th century in the middle of the period of cultural, economic growth in Japan. A curious fact is that the same word, manga, comes from the union of both word drawings and doodles. And it wasn't until the World War II in 1945 that in height of the post-war period, manga consumption became widespread and firmly established itself as an industry. At this time, Japan demanded the psychological need to look the other way from the suffering that they were through. But on the other side of the globe, on the Western side, is that the link focused on creating amazing characters capable of overcoming large-scale obstacles, basically saving the world, using superpowers appropriately. The cultural and political aspects that these characters exhibited showcase a need of pushing the reader to excel, be better, create competition. It should be noted that in this section, I am focusing on the comics that we know today and not the ones from its beginning because its purpose has varied with the passage of history, and that conversation is a little bit more controversial because the origins has many conversations about it. More than anything, I want to focus on the gold, silver, and bronze eras, which are basically from the 1940s to the 1990s. That's where both means of expressions were focused on creating content where the psychological needs were met for the public after the devastation of a war. Once the comics were in and they had their international expansion, the term for superheroes became super popular thanks to titles such as the Justice League in the 1960s, Spider-Man in 1962, the Fantastic Four in the 1961, and many others. But the media, as once it expanded, it affected other continents, and in the beginning of the 1960s, a new awareness of the environment became established, especially in France and Italy, because there, the intellectuals no longer approach this subject from a social, psychologically standpoint and began to focus in more of aesthetics and style. This made it more pleasing to the eye. People became more akin to the idea of this particular style. Its evolution gave way to the growth of visualization, and today's designers have adapted these stories where we originally thought they were fantastical or non-real, and gave way to technological innovations in many ways that we didn't expect it. Reality was brought by fantasy as the next step in advancement, which is fun to think about it now that I mentioned, because when it comes from topics that one thinks is childish, these new opportunities came to how we continue creating the development of ideas for the next generations just by reading something that made us laugh or be entertained and had fun. So since we already established and refreshed the memory in the part of illustrative and more drawing style, I also need to mention about the animation on both sides of the globe, because they go hand in hand, and in this conversation it's cool to have both points of view. First of all, they were created around the 1900s, shortly after inventing the moving images, what would later become the term cinematography, where a series of animated short films were made, and they were heavily influenced by an American aesthetics, but both East and West sides were in a stage of visual experimentation, and they were both trying to find their characteristic styles. It was in the middle of the 1920s where these styles came to be, and they decided to go with them. And fun fact, in the 1960s, the genre of giant robots and mechas became popular, the same as the 70s, and it was booming with the public because the world technology was advancing, and therefore they needed to generate excitement of these new things. So industry around the globe concluded that they should expose these new materials in a way that it was acceptable to and happy to fans. And it was because of the good response of the public, because of these fantasies that were narrated, that they decided to add it to their daily lives. Even though these new things were strange and they didn't know where they came from, they were still fun. In those times, even when I was younger, there wasn't that term of nerd or otaku or that phenomenon. Everyone saw Dragon Ball or Sailor Moon, and this is just to mention two of the greatest in the Japanese industry. But there was also Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and among many others. And not to mention the independent studies that inspire the culture of adventure-like lifestyles, such as Tintin. And let me tell you something, if you haven't seen Tintin or even read it, I recommend you right now to stop the podcast or finish listening to it, but try to Google or Amazon at least one volume and just get engaged with it, because I promise you it's going to be something that is going to make you excited just to discover a new thing to read. And I will say the same for Moebius. He is the creator of the Hermetic Garage and Arsac and the great French movement in comic books. And so that's why I will really recommend you to drop what you're doing and just Google it for a second just to see at least the art, because I promise you, you will be inspired. But going back to the conversation, both are special in their own ways because they made us realize how much we have been affected by these cartoons. Even now, a good number of people know what a Henki Dama or a Power of Love or Thor's Hammer or Iron Man's technology is. All these conversations show what the real world could be and how the aesthetics could be applied on it. They create a visual space where people interact and understand a common purpose. And once these conversations are established, fantasy kind of becomes reality. So with the rise of social media and the internet, we are more aware of this form of entertainment and can access several backups of memories that basically we didn't have that before. And it continues to grow. So the general culture of today always tries not to take itself too seriously, and at least subconsciously they try to replicate the teachings of these shows that they're watching, because it gives the opportunity to expand our perspective and learn distinctive methodologies. These shows allow us to create an empathetic system where we talk and exchange passages about these fables. And even though they're childish, they make us connect more than ever. Because sometimes we focus on talking about design in a very serious way. We like to refer to past trends that are described in a specific way, and we want to portray ourselves as an advanced or mature society. But remember that the past is slightly simpler to just be able to empathize. Because we all experience the same things. And using this medium as a source of inspiration, we are able to develop ourselves as artists. And a good artist and a good designer are the ones that are able to adapt to the current needs of society and do it in a way that still remains relevant. Because it seems to me that we should follow this media just a little bit more and take into account that we must not lose that innocence and our desire to seek the unknown. We can find solutions to problems, but try to do it in a creative way without losing sight of what we can do, and in the end, we can always move forward. Basically, try to leave a little bit of teaching on each chapter, kind of like a comic, because we can keep not giving up, keep hoping, keep growing. Because these are goals that we always have as a person, and furthermore, we are at a stage where we have never seen this in history, where the convergence of culture has become a popular issue among the masses. And the question remains that what would happen later? How do you see the future of media and visuals? Will the fanatism focus on producing fake comms, or will it link the audience into their own individual needs? But again, these are weird questions that I'm always going to ask you guys, because it's just to keep the conversation going even after this episode is done. So we must not stop thinking about these illustrations and how they're defining our personalities, because life lessons are given by simple stories. They are within these fables that these tales, in the end, leads us to become better. You are your own superhero or anti-hero or villain, and it's up to each of us to define what we want to show to others, either personally or as creative designers. But I will tell you one thing. I think it is true that you learn more when you have fun and you let your imagination run wild. When you least expect it, you are inspired by things around you and things that you can relate yourself with. Maybe you want to grow as a person because of a character that you have never met, or the same happens even if it's fictional or reality. And that is valid. Even I do that sometimes. As creatives, we must continue to observe, analyze, and develop our own personal narrative. Whether we choose to be an architect or a graphic designer or a filmmaker or a chef or a fashionista, whatever, we must stay inspired. And although this media doesn't take itself too seriously, I think it has one thing or two that can keep teaching us how to be better. So with this last thought, I think this is all for this episode of Architacora. I hope you guys found it relaxing and entertaining, because I wanted to focus on something different than just talking about purpose. In between episodes, I would like to do it in a way where we talk about serious things and then not so much on others. I hope that you guys were able to remember the things that you saw as kids and give a little flashback about the good times. So don't take things so seriously. Being childish is not a taboo, at least not all the time, but So thank you so much for listening. Do not forget to go to iTunes and leave a little comment and a mark on those 5 stars so more people can continue to find about the series. And that way more people can talk about what's your favorite series. Or please give me any recommendation. That's always super fun. I'm a little nerd, so I might have seen most of them, but it's always nice to find other people being as passionate as I am about something as silly as comics. So once again, this is your host, Zoe Rosia Moreno, saying goodbye once again. See you in the next episode of Architacora. And as always, keep on creating and keep on listening. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you. Bye.